my girlfriend said. I need space to understand what I really want. I nodded and gave her exactly that. No calls, no messages, no drama. Weeks later, when silence felt heavier than arguments ever did, she realized space changes people too. I think I need some space. She said it like it was the weather report, like she was commenting on the temperature outside. Casual, unbothered, almost rehearsed. I remember staring at the half-empty mug of coffee sitting between us on the kitchen table, watching the steam curl upward and disappear. And I remember thinking, okay, not okay, as in I'm fine with this. Just, okay, as in, I heard you. She was still talking. Something about needing time to think, needing room to breathe, needing clarity on what she actually wanted from life, from us, from herself. I nodded slowly. Once, twice. The way you nod when someone tells you something in a language you only partially understand. I'm not breaking up with you, she added quickly, like that was supposed to anchor me. I just need to figure some things out. I looked at her then, really looked, and saw nothing that alarmed me in the immediate sense. No tears, no trembling lip, just this composed, almost clinical expression, like she'd already rehearsed this moment a dozen times before breakfast. And maybe she had. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. I was 28. She was 26. We had been together for 3 years and 4 months. Not that I was counting, but I was the kind of person who remembered those numbers without trying. We didn't live together, but we were close enough that her presence was woven into the fabric of my daily life. The texts in the morning, the calls during lunch, the evenings we spent either at her place or mine, splitting takeout and talking about nothing in particular. That was us. That was what I thought we were. Okay, I finally said out loud. She blinked. Okay. You want space? I said, keeping my voice even. I'll give you space. She seemed to expect more from me. Maybe an argument. Maybe pushback. Maybe the kind of desperate scrambling that she probably knew would make her feel more wanted. But I'd been down that road before, not with her, but with versions of myself I no longer recognized, and I had no interest in being that person again. I just want us to be honest with each other, she said, reaching across the table, almost touching my hand, then pulling back. I'm not going anywhere. I just need time to breathe. I nodded again, then breathe. Here's what I mean by small distances, because I don't want to gloss over it. The first year with Mia was, I'll use the word electric, even though it's overused, because it was the most accurate thing. We talked every day for hours. Not the performative early relationship marathon calls where both people are just trying to impress each other. Real conversations. Arguments about books. Theories about people we'd both observed from across rooms. Plans we were genuinely excited about. She made me want to be more articulate about the things I half felt. And I think I made her feel seen in a way she described not feeling in previous relationships. This specific, quiet being seen that doesn't require an audience. That was the first year. The second year is where the drift started, and I need to be fair about it because it wasn't one person's fault. My job got significantly more demanding around the 14-month mark. Not dramatically, no single catastrophic shift. Just a slow accumulation of responsibility that meant I was coming home more depleted, with less left for the quality of presence she'd gotten used to. And Mia had a falling out with her closest friend around the same time. A genuine, deep rupture with someone she'd known for a decade. She was grieving that loss, quietly, without fully acknowledging it as grief. And I see this clearly now. I wasn't skilled enough yet at recognizing grief when it doesn't look like crying. When it looks like withdrawal. When it looks like picking small fights about unimportant things because the big thing hurts too much to name. I kept trying to fix the surface problems. She kept presenting surface problems because the real one felt too enormous. And we were two people who genuinely loved each other, spinning in slightly different orbits, neither of us knowing how to say, hey, I think we're drifting, can we acknowledge that? So we didn't acknowledge it. We just kept going. And by year 3, the drift had become the new normal. And normal has a way of becoming invisible. Until someone finally says I need space, and the word space splits open something that had been accumulating for months. Her name was Mia. We met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner 3 years prior, seated next to each other entirely by accident, which felt like fate the way most accidents do in hindsight. She was sharp, funny in that dry, understated way that sneaks up on you, and she had this particular habit of tilting her head slightly when she was genuinely interested in what you were saying. I fell for that tilt first. Everything else came later. We were good together, genuinely good, for a long time. Then somewhere in the second year, things started to shift in ways that are hard to name when you're inside them. Small distances. A conversation that used to flow for 2 hours now wrapping up in 20 minutes. A laugh that used to come easy now landing a half second too late. You don't see these things clearly when you're standing in the middle of them. You just feel a vague unease that you keep dismissing because everything still technically looks fine from the outside. I noticed. I always noticed. I just never said anything because part of me believed that relationships had natural rhythms, periods of closeness and periods of quiet, and that this was just one of those quiet spells. I told myself we were fine. I told myself that so many times it stopped meaning anything. The week after that kitchen table conversation, I did exactly what I said I would. I gave her space. I did not text her in the morning. I did not call during lunch. I did not reach out after work to ask how her day went, or send her some link I knew she'd find interesting, or text her a photo of something stupid I saw on the street that I knew would make her laugh. I went quiet. Completely, deliberately, quietly quiet. And the silence felt strange at first, the way a room feels strange after you move furniture out. All that empty air where something used to be. I filled it with the gym, which I'd been meaning to get back to for months. I filled it with cooking, actual cooking, not just reheating leftovers, but real meals that took time and focus and produced something worth eating. I filled it with my friend Derek, who had been complaining for the better part of 6 months that I'd become a ghost ever since Mia and I got serious. He wasn't wrong about that. We grabbed beers on a Tuesday, which felt mildly rebellious and deeply necessary. You seem different, Derek said, tilting his bottle toward me. Better different or worse different? He thought about it, like someone who just woke up after a long sleep. A little confused, but weirdly rested. I laughed at that, the first real laugh in a week. And I sat with that for a moment. The fact that a week of not pouring myself into someone else had already shifted something in me. Not healed anything, not resolved anything, but shifted, like a weight that had been sitting slightly off-center, finally finding its proper balance point. There was a night, somewhere in that first week, where I almost broke. It was a Sunday, around 11 o'clock. The apartment had gotten very quiet in the way apartments do on Sunday nights when there's nothing left to fill them. I'd been to the gym. I'd made dinner. I'd watched half of a film I couldn't get into and turned it off. And then I just sat there with the full weight of it. The full strange specific weight of loving someone who isn't calling. I picked up my phone. I had a whole message drafted in my head. Not desperate, not dramatic, just a simple hey, thinking about you, hope you're okay. Reasonable, human, the kind of thing a person says. But I sat there with my thumbs hovering, and I thought about what Mia had actually said. Not the subtext, not the interpretation, the actual words. I need space to understand what I really want. Not I need you to check on me in a week. Not I need you to remind me that you're still there. Space. Real space. The uninterrupted kind. And I thought about the last 3 years. All the ways I'd been present, reliably, consistently, sometimes at the cost of my own exhaustion. And I thought, if 3 years isn't enough to answer the question of whether I'm worth returning to, then a Sunday night text isn't going to tip the scales. I put the phone face down. I made tea. I sat by the window with the tea and watched the street below, and I let myself feel the absence fully, without softening it. That's the part that most people skip. They feel it, and then they immediately do something to make the feeling smaller. Text someone. Scroll something. Drink something. I just sat with it. For almost an hour. And at the end of that hour, I didn't feel better exactly. But I felt more solidly in my own skin. Like I'd passed something. Like the feeling had tested me, and I'd stood still long enough to let it finish. Day 10 arrived without a word from Mia. I want to be honest about this part. I checked my phone. More than I'd like to admit. Not desperately, not obsessively, but I checked. Because 3 years doesn't just evaporate from your nervous system because you decide it should. The muscle memory of reaching for your phone when you think of someone doesn't care about your new philosophy on space and silence. It just does what it's always done. But I didn't reach out. Every time I picked up the phone, I put it back down. Not out of ego, not out of game playing, but because she had asked for something specific and I had promised, without words, but still promised, to give her exactly that. If I reached out after 10 days, I would be saying, I trust your words but not enough to actually honor them. And that felt worse than the silence. So I let the silence live. I let it be as big as it needed to be. 2 weeks in, my coworker Owen cornered me by the coffee machine with that specific expression people wear when they're pretending not to pry. You and Mia still doing the thing? He asked. The thing. He waved his hand vaguely. The break, or whatever it is. Word travels fast in small offices. It's not a break, I said automatically, then stopped. Because I wasn't entirely sure that was true anymore. She needed space, I said instead. I'm giving her space. Owen looked at me for a moment. How long is she planning on needing it? She didn't put a timeline on it. He nodded slowly, the way people do when they're trying to figure out how to word the thing they're actually thinking. You're not worried? About what? About what she might figure out during all that space. I poured my coffee, took a slow sip. She's going to figure out whatever she was always going to figure out, I said. The space just means she does it without me hovering over her shoulder, trying to manage the outcome. Owen stared at me like I'd said something in a foreign language. That's very evolved of you. Or very tired, I said, and I wasn't sure which one it was. The thing about giving someone space, real space, not the kind you give while checking their social media every 20 minutes, is that it does something to you too. Nobody talks about that part. Everyone focuses on the person who asked for space, what they'll discover, what they'll decide, whether they'll come back changed or come back not at all. But the person who gives the space? They change too. And the change happens quietly, without announcement, like how a tree grows. You don't see it happening, but then one day you look up and the branches are somewhere they weren't before. Something happened around day 14 that I almost left out of this story because it felt like a distraction from the main thread. But I think it's relevant. There was a woman at the gym. Her name was Priya. She was there most evenings, and we'd had the occasional brief exchange the way you do with people who occupy the same space on a regular basis. Around day 14, after a workout, she asked if I wanted to grab a coffee at the place next door. Not flirtatious, just friendly. The way two people who've been nodding at each other for weeks eventually just talk. I said yes. We sat for about 40 minutes. She was interesting, worked in architecture, had strong opinions about cities, had recently ended a long relationship herself, and was navigating that particular kind of recalibration. It was an easy conversation. The kind where you're genuinely engaged and not performing engagement. And somewhere in the middle of it, I noticed something. I wasn't comparing her to Mia. I wasn't measuring the conversation against what Mia and I used to have. I was just here, present to this specific conversation with this specific person. And that was new. Because for the past couple of years, every interaction had been filtered through this invisible lens of how does this relate to Mia, to us, to what we have, or what we're missing. Everything ran through that lens. It's exhausting in a way you don't notice until it stops. We finished the coffee. I thanked her. I walked home thinking about the fact that I could be engaged, genuinely and fully engaged, without it meaning anything complicated, without it being a sign of something, without needing to confess it or hide it or turn it into data about the state of my relationship. I just existed, as a whole person, in the world, having coffee with someone who was also a whole person in the world. And I remembered that this was available to me, that this had always been available to me, that I hadn't lost myself. I'd just been looking for myself in the wrong place. By day 17, I had gotten through a book I'd been meaning to read for 2 years. Not because I was using it to fill time. I genuinely got absorbed in it, stayed up until 1 in the morning with it, woke up thinking about it. I had forgotten what it felt like to want something just for myself. Not because Mia wouldn't have approved. Not because we were fighting. But simply because when you are deeply enmeshed in a relationship, the daily back and forth of it, the constant checking in, the emotional maintenance of another person, you quietly stop being a person with independent appetites. You become a person in a relationship, which is a different thing entirely. I had been so focused on being someone Mia could count on that I had slowly, almost imperceptibly, stopped counting on myself. I saw that clearly now, not with bitterness, with the particular clarity that only comes from standing outside something you used to be inside. She texted on day 19. Hey, hope you're doing okay. 5 words. I stared at them for a long moment. Not analyzing, not strategizing, just sitting with how much smaller they were than I expected the first contact to be. After 3 years. After 19 days of nothing. Hey, hope you're doing okay. I typed back, 2 hours later. Doing well. Hope you are too. Clean. Honest. Nothing more than she gave me. She responded within minutes, which told me something. I've been thinking a lot. That's good, I typed. Asterisk thinking is good. A pause. Then, can we talk soon? I looked at that question for a while. Then, when you're ready, I'm around. She didn't respond after that, and I put my phone face down on the counter and went back to cooking dinner. Not because I didn't care, but because I was starting to understand the difference between caring about someone and allowing their uncertainty to become your emergency. She called on day 23. It was a Thursday evening. I was in the middle of reorganizing my bookshelf, another thing I had been putting off for longer than I'd admit. And when her name lit up the screen, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not excitement, not dread, a kind of settled calm, like I'd already lived through whatever was about to happen in some quiet rehearsal of the mind. I answered. Hey, she said. Hey. A pause. The kind of pause that is wait. How are you, she asked. I'm good, I said. Really good, actually. And the truth of it, the fact that I wasn't just saying it to sound confident or to protect myself or to perform some version of being fine, must have come through in my voice. Because she was quiet for a moment longer than usual. You sound different, she said. Different how? I don't know. Lighter. I set a book down on the shelf. Maybe I am. Another pause. I miss you, she said. And there it was. The thing I had been waiting to hear, probably for longer than these 23 days, maybe for months, maybe back to when those small distances first started appearing and I kept telling myself it was fine. I miss you. 3 words I used to crave like a fix. But standing here, on this side of 23 days of silence, in this apartment that felt more like mine than it ever had before, I noticed something. The words landed softly. Not like a relief. Not like an answer. Just softly. I miss you too, I said. Because it was true. I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. But I also wasn't going to let missing her be the entire argument. We agreed to meet Saturday. A coffee place downtown, neutral ground. The kind of setting that signals this is a conversation we're both choosing to have rather than the automatic gravity of each other's apartments. I got there first. Found a corner table. Ordered a flat white. Waited. She came in 7 minutes after the time we'd said, which is exactly on time by Mia's internal clock. She's always exactly 7 minutes after whatever she says, without fail, and I used to find it mildly maddening, but now just found it familiar. She looked good. That surprised me. Somehow. Not because I expected her to look terrible, but because the past 23 days in my head had cast her in a vague, undefined softness, like a memory already fading. But here she was, entirely specific. Dark coat, hair a little longer than I remembered. She scanned the room, found me, and the expression that crossed her face was complicated. Relief and something else. Something more cautious. She sat down across from me and wrapped both hands around the menu, even though she already knew what she was going to order. Old habit. Something to hold. You really do look good, she said, studying me like she was trying to reconcile something. Thanks. Like, genuinely. I wasn't expecting. She stopped herself. You weren't expecting what? She looked down. I wasn't expecting you to look like you were doing fine. I leaned back slightly. Were you expecting me to not be doing fine? She had the grace to look at least a little embarrassed. I don't know what I was expecting, she admitted. I guess I thought you'd reach out sooner. You asked for space. I know. So I gave you space. I know, she said again, quieter this time. The server came. She ordered her usual. We waited for the server to leave. How long were you planning on giving it? She asked. As long as you needed, I said simply. She was quiet for a moment. That's not a normal thing to do, she said. What do you mean? Most people, when someone asks for space, they hover. They text after 2 days. They check in. They make it feel like the space is a countdown clock. Would that have helped? She opened her mouth. Closed it. No, she admitted finally. It wouldn't have. Then I didn't do it. She looked at me like she was trying to figure something out. Were you angry? In the beginning? Any of it? I thought about that honestly. I think I was confused, I said. And hurt. But not angry. Anger felt like wasted energy for a situation that needed clarity, not more heat. She stared at me. Who are you? She said. Not unkindly. More like a genuine question. I wanted to ask her directly, the thing that had been sitting at the back of my mind since the beginning. But I waited until the second coffee arrived. Was there someone else? I asked. It wasn't an accusation. She could hear that it wasn't. She met my eyes steadily. No, she said. There wasn't. I nodded. I need you to believe that, she added. I do. Because I know asking for space sounds like a code for something else. And I understand why you'd. I didn't assume that, I said. I wondered. But I didn't assume. She exhaled slowly. There were moments, she said carefully, where I felt like I was disappearing. Not because of anything you did. Because of something in me that kept waiting for permission to take up space. Permission from who? From, I don't know. The relationship. The version of us that had certain expectations built into it. She turned her mug slowly. I think I'd gotten so used to fitting myself into whatever shape was needed that I forgot I had my own shape. I sat with that. Why didn't you tell me that? I asked. Before the space conversation. Why not just say that? She smiled, a little ruefully. Because I didn't have the words for it yet. I only figured out how to say it after I had time to actually think without the noise of us being so close. So you needed distance to find the language. Yes. That's fair, I said. And I meant it. You're not angry, she said. Not a question. An observation. I told you. It's not anger. Then what is it? I thought about it honestly. It's something like grief, I said. For the version of us that didn't know how to say these things before they became a crisis. Something moved across her face. Something that looked a lot like recognition. Yeah, she said softly. That's exactly what it is. We talked for almost 3 hours. The coffees went cold. We ordered more. The late afternoon crowd filtered in and out around us like background noise in a film, and we sat in our corner table talking in the way we hadn't talked in. Honestly, I couldn't remember the last time we talked like this. She told me about the things she'd been thinking about during the space. The way she'd felt herself shrinking into a version of what she thought the relationship needed her to be. How she'd stopped doing things she loved. Painting, specifically, something she'd done since she was 15. Because there was always something else that felt more pressing. How she'd started to feel lost inside her own life. And she was being honest. I could tell the difference between Mia performing introspection and Mia actually living it. And this was the real version. The one that didn't have its presentation cleaned up. The one that stumbled over its own words. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't rush to defend myself or to draw lines of equivalence. Well, I felt small too. You know, even though I had plenty of those lines ready. I just listened, because she deserved to be heard without me immediately converting it into a debate. When she finished, she looked at me with something raw and open in her expression. I think I've been blaming the relationship for things that were actually inside me, she said. Yeah, I said. You knew that. I had a feeling. She laughed, a small, sad laugh. Why didn't you say anything? Because there's a version of saying it that sounds like you're wrong about how you feel, and I didn't want to say it that way. She was quiet for a moment. You could have pushed back more, she said. When I asked for space, you just nodded, like it didn't even shake you. It shook me, I said. It just didn't need to shake you. She looked at me steadily. I kept waiting for you to text, she said, and there was something almost confessional about the way she said it. Like, I knew I'd asked for space, but I still kept looking at my phone. I know the feeling. You looked at your phone too? Every day? Multiple times. Something shifted in her expression. Then why? Because you asked for something, I said. And if I undercut it 2 days in because I couldn't sit with the discomfort, what would that say about me? She sat with that. It would say you cared, she offered quietly. It would say I cared more about managing my own anxiety than respecting what you asked for, I said. That's not the same as caring about you. The coffee shop hummed around us. We didn't resolve everything that Saturday. I want to be clear about that. Because the temptation when telling a story like this is to compress the messy parts into a clean arc with a clear turning point and a decisive conclusion. That's not what happened. What happened was messy, and more human than that. We talked. We left. We hugged outside in the cold for a long moment, and she held on a few seconds longer than I expected, and I let her. Then we went our separate ways. And the next day, and the day after that, we were texting again, gently, carefully, like two people who had both been burned and were deciding together how close to bring their hands back toward the fire. Not rushing, not pretending the conversation hadn't happened, but not abandoning the connection either. This is the part of the story that gets edited out of Reddit posts and YouTube narrations because it doesn't have a sharp enough edge to hold attention. But this in between, this slow, deliberate, unresolved middle, is where most of real life actually lives. About a week after that coffee, she asked if she could come over. Not for a big conversation. Not to deliver a verdict. Just, can I come over? I miss your couch. I miss your terrible taste in ambient music. That last part made me laugh more than it probably should have. I said yes. She brought wine. I made pasta. We sat on my terrible couch and put something on TV that neither of us were really watching. And it felt like something. Not quite what we were before, but not nothing either. At some point she asked, what changed for you? During the space? I thought about that for a while. I remembered who I was before I was someone's boyfriend, I said. She turned to look at me. Is that a bad thing? That you forgot? Not bad. Just real. Did you like who you remembered being? I smiled a little. Yeah, I actually did. She nodded slowly, like she understood something she'd only theoretically understood before. I think that's what I was looking for too, she said. Just a reminder of myself, of what I actually want versus what I'd convinced myself I should want. And I asked, and I'm still figuring it out, she said honestly. Fair enough. But I know I want you in that figuring out, she said. Not as the answer, but as part of it. I let that sit for a moment. I can be that, I said. But I'm not the same person I was a month ago. She tilted her head. That tilt, the one that got me years ago. What do you mean? I mean, I spent 23 days rebuilding something in myself that I'd slowly given up without noticing, I said. And I'm not interested in giving it back up again. Not for a relationship, not for anything. She was quiet. I wouldn't want you to, she said. You say that now. I mean it now. I know. But meaning it and living inside it are different things. And we'll have to figure out what that looks like. She nodded. Together? I looked at her for a long moment. The wine. The terrible ambient music. The life I'd built back for myself in 23 days of silence. Together, I said. I want to go back to something, because I think the real story here isn't about Mia, or about the space she asked for, or even about whether we made it. The real story is about what happened inside me. And I want to be honest about it, because when I've told versions of this story to friends, to Derek, to my cousin Cole, to Owen over drinks, everyone wants to focus on Mia. Was she testing you? Was she interested in someone else? Did she come back because she was scared of losing you? These are the questions people ask. And I understand why. The drama lives in those questions. The tension lives in the possibility of betrayal or competition or a clean villain. But that's not what this story is. Here's the truth. I had spent 3.5 years being a very good boyfriend in ways that slowly cost me my own interior life. Not because Mia demanded it. Not because she was manipulative or selfish or the kind of person who deliberately consumes the people around them. But because I have a specific way of loving people that involves a gradual, almost invisible surrender of myself. I pour myself into the relationship, into the logistics of it, into making the other person feel safe and seen and appreciated, into being the steady one, the reliable one, the one who doesn't flinch or panic or create scenes. And on the surface, that looks like a gift. And it is a gift, partially. But underneath it, there's a slow erosion, a dimming. I stop having opinions about things that don't directly affect the relationship. I stop making plans that don't factor in the other person's schedule. I stop pursuing things I love because they take time and attention that feels like it should go elsewhere. And I stop noticing any of this because I've told myself it's what love looks like. Until someone asks for space. And you have to fill 23 days on your own. And suddenly you realize the container you thought was full of relationship was actually, much of it, just you, your energy, your attention, your care. And with nowhere for it to go, you start redirecting it back toward yourself. And for the first time in years, you feel like a whole person again. That was the real revelation. Not that Mia needed space, but that I needed it too. There was a conversation we had, about 3 weeks after she came back over, that I keep returning to. It was one of those late-night conversations that starts out as nothing and ends up being everything. We were in my bed, lights off, talking in that darkness where things feel safer to say. She said, I was scared you weren't going to care. When I asked for space, I turned my head toward her. What do you mean? I mean, I half expected you to say okay, and then text me the next day asking if I was serious. The way things go. The way things go, I echoed. The way it goes in every. She paused, choosing words. The way it went with guys before you. Where asking for space just became this long negotiation. Where I'd say I needed something, and they'd turn it into a conversation about their feelings about me needing that thing. I was quiet. I didn't want to do that. I know. And I wasn't consciously testing you. She hesitated. But maybe some part of me was. Like, I needed to know what you'd do. And she laughed softly. And you did the exact opposite of what I expected. Which was somehow the most unsettling thing you could have done. Unsettling. I know that sounds backwards. But when you went quiet, really completely quiet, I realized how much I'd been relying on the background noise of your attention. The constant checking in, the texts, the knowing you were always there. She shifted slightly. And when it was gone, it was like she searched for the right word. Like turning off a fan you've had running all night. The absence of the sound becomes the loudest thing in the room. I thought about that image for a while. Were you angry at me? I asked. For actually doing it? A pause. A little, she admitted. Because I went quiet? Or because you expected me not to? Because she stopped. Both. Because if you'd come crawling back after 3 days, I'd have had something to push against. Some confirmation that I was wanted enough to make someone override their own pride. And when you didn't come crawling, I didn't get that confirmation. And that felt like maybe you didn't need me the way I thought you did. I let that breathe. I needed you, I said. I just didn't think needing you meant I had to prove it by disrespecting what you asked for. She was quiet for a long time. I think that's the most important thing anyone's ever said to me about love, she said quietly. Which part? The part where needing someone and proving it are different things. Here's what nobody tells you about the after. About the part after the space, after the coffee, after the coming back together. It's that things are different. And different is terrifying before you understand that different isn't always worse. We were more careful with each other. Not in a walking on eggshells way. In a knowing now that things can break way. Which made the whole structure more honest. I stopped pretending I was fine when I wasn't. I stopped swallowing the small things because they seemed too small to mention and then having them compound into something enormous. When I felt the urge to slowly disappear into the relationship again, to start reorganizing my life around her schedule, her moods, her needs at the cost of my own, I noticed it now. And I said something. Not dramatically, not as an accusation. Just, hey, I feel myself starting to do that thing I do. Can we talk about it? And she had her version of the same conversation. She started painting again. 2 evenings a week, minimum, non-negotiable. And I never once treated it like an inconvenience or competed with it for her time, because I understood now, viscerally understood, what it cost her to have stopped. We also started fighting more. Not worse fights, but more honest ones. The kind where things actually got said rather than circled. Where the argument was about the real thing instead of the 17 layers of subtext surrounding the real thing. It was uncomfortable. It was also better. I ran into an old acquaintance about 2 months after all of this. A guy named Theo I'd known casually in college, the kind of person you always liked but never quite stayed close to. We got coffee almost by accident, stuck next to each other in line at a place we both happened to walk into at the same time. We caught up. I told him I was still with Mia, that we'd gone through something, that we were in a better place. He said, those rupture and repair moments, they're either the thing that kills a relationship or the thing that finally makes it real. I asked him which one he thought ours was. He shrugged. Depends if you both actually changed, or if you just both got scared and came back to the comfortable thing. I thought about that on the walk home. I was honest with myself. Mia had changed. The way she moved through the relationship was different, more deliberate, less default. And I had changed. The way I occupied my own life was different, more present to myself, less configured entirely around someone else's needs. Were both of those things true because we'd actually done the work? Or were they true because the space had just given us both enough distance to get nostalgic? I sat with that question for a long time, and I didn't fully have an answer. But I decided that the honest act was to keep asking the question rather than pretend the question had a clean resolution. One of the things I've never been able to stop thinking about is the moment she said I need space, and I said okay. Because I've told that story to several people now, and every time I do, they ask the same question. Weren't you scared she wasn't coming back? And the honest answer is, yes. Every day. There were nights in those 23 days when I lay awake in the dark doing the kind of mental accounting you do when something feels like it might be ending. Tallying the years. Replaying conversations. Asking myself which things I could have done differently and which things were always going to lead here regardless. That's not a comfortable thing to admit. Because the version of this story that plays better, the version with more dignity and narrative momentum, is the one where I gave her the space from a place of total centeredness, total clarity, total equanimity. But that's not the full truth. The full truth is that I gave her the space because I had decided, at some point along the way, that trying to control outcomes was not something I was willing to do anymore. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd watched, in myself and in others, what controlling outcomes does to people. You contort yourself. You perform. You lose track of what you actually want because you're so busy managing what the other person thinks of you. And you end up in a relationship with someone who loves a version of you that you've been curating, not living. That felt like the worst possible outcome. Worse than losing her. Worse than the silence. So I sat with the uncertainty, and I let it be uncertain, and I just kept being the person I actually was. And whatever she decided, she would be deciding about that person, not a performance of that person. I don't know if that's brave. I've had people tell me it is. Derek called it brave. Owen called it crazy. My cousin Cole, who has been married for 9 years and has the emotional vocabulary of someone who has survived a lot of real life, said, "That's not brave, that's maturity. Those are different things." I think Cole is right. Brave implies doing something despite fear. And what I did wasn't really despite fear. It was simply the only thing that made sense to me. When someone you love asks for something real, something honest, something that costs them to ask, you honor it. You don't weaponize their vulnerability by using their absence of reassurance as leverage. You don't manufacture a crisis to make yourself feel needed. You honor it. And then you see who comes back. And if no one comes back, well, then you have something true. Something painful, yes, but true. And truth, even the kind that takes things from you, is still worth more than the comfortable lie of a relationship held together by one person's constant management of the other's doubt. Mia and I had dinner last week. Her apartment this time. She'd painted a new piece, large canvas, blues and greens, something oceanic and alive, and hung it on the wall where there used to be a generic print she'd had since college. I stood in front of it for a while. "You like it?" she asked from the kitchen. "It's the best thing you've made," I said. She leaned against the doorframe. "I had time," she said. "Yeah." She smiled at that. A real, quiet, unglamorous smile. Not the performed kind. The one that actually lives in a person's face. We had dinner. We talked about ordinary things, a show she'd been watching, a project at my job, plans for the upcoming holiday stretch. Normal things. Unburdened things. And at some point I realized, this is it. This is what the work produces. Not the dramatic reunion. Not the tearful apology. Not the cinematic moment of someone running through an airport or standing in the rain. Just two people having dinner in an apartment with a good painting on the wall, talking about normal things without performing anything for each other. Just this, which is so much harder to earn than it looks, and so much more worth having than anything I could have forced into existence by not honoring those 23 days. If you are somewhere in the middle of something like this, if someone you love has asked for space, and you are white-knuckling your way through the silence, and every hour feels like it has sand in it, and your phone keeps being heavier than your hands want it to be, I won't tell you it gets easier right away. I won't tell you they'll definitely come back. I won't tell you that the version of yourself you build in the silence will be enough to make the loss okay, if the loss is what happens. What I will say is this. The space changes you too. That's the thing no one says. Everyone talks about what the person asking for space will figure out. No one talks about what you'll figure out. About yourself. About what you've quietly given away in the name of keeping someone else comfortable. About the life that exists just slightly to the side of the one you've been living. The silence will be heavy. Some nights it will be heavier than any argument you ever had. But it won't stay that heavy. And whoever you are on the other side of it, whether the person comes back or doesn't, that person will be more entirely themselves than the one who stood in the kitchen and heard "I need space" and felt the floor drop. And that person is worth building, even if it costs you something. Especially if it costs you something. The last thing Mia said to me that night, standing at her door as I was leaving, was, "Thank you for not chasing me." I looked at her. "I wasn't going to chase you." "I know," she said. "That's what I'm thanking you for." I thought about that on the drive home. The whole way home, actually. About how often the most loving thing you can do for someone is trust them enough to let them leave. About how often the things we call love are actually just fear with better lighting. About how 3 years of something real can teach you, in 23 days of silence, more about yourself than you learned in the entire 3 years of noise. I pulled into my parking spot, sat in the car for a minute, listened to the silence, and for the first time in a very long time, it didn't feel like something was missing. It just felt like space. Good space. The kind that has room in it for something real to grow.